Hello, everybody. White, geistige squat, gabiniskis, tansei, tanshi, bonjour, um, bonjour, hola, hello and welcome. If I haven't said hello in a way that speaks to your heart or your place, please feel free to share in the chat and say hi. We are so grateful for each and every one of you joining us here as we dive into our penultimate episode of our spring series. I'm going to bring up my slides so we can jump right in. It's the 27th of May. I'm not quite sure how we're there already at this time of the year. It feels like yesterday it was the new year. And some folks have found the react button. So maybe I can do a little bit of that housekeeping up front. Yes, at the bottom of your bar, you'll have a react button. You can find some emojis because unfortunately, thousands and thousands of you are registering for these, and we can't fit you all into the Zoom meeting boxes. So hello, hello. Thanks for sharing the love. If it really assists you to have closed caption, somebody's found it. You can use the CC button, or it might be under more with three dots, and that will give you a live transcript across the screen. I can also make that available for anyone along with the video recording if that helps you to interact with this learning in a better way. There is a Q&A box at the bottom, so please feel free to put any questions that come up for Dr. Joseph through that. And myself and Rachel, are working behind the scenes to share them. And feel free to connect in the chat. This is a community, and we're so glad you're all here. So we are here for being held and known by the land, Indigenous resources for outdoor learning, and it's going to be a really good day. I'm joining you from Sinaik's territory, and that's the love of my life there, my husband on the paddleboard. And we spent the weekend floating down Sinhunhuitqua, the Swift River in Insulchin, and this is the homelands and an important place always for the Sinaikst people, but especially next month when the Sinaikst come to paddle down from the top of their territory here where I live in Shkihikan, where the ridgelines meet the water, down to Kettle Falls to honour the salmon. And two beautiful visitors on this branch here, two incredible eagles who just sat patiently and watched us go past. And we were a group of about 15, just struck awe into silence by their beauty. And in this moment and in spring especially, I'm just so grateful for the diversity and the lush life that I see around. And I'm particularly grateful for my Sinaxt elders, for also my Shukwatmuk teachers, my Sukh teachers, my Tanakhan teachers, who all call this place home over different times and periods, for the knowledge that they have imparted on me that allows me to see these not just as something to look at, but as a part of me and myself a part of this world. So that's what's resonating for me in this moment as I acknowledge this place and the Indigenous ways of being. And it means ever such a lot. I'm very grateful. If you enjoy spending time with us in learning spaces and particularly learning from some of our incredible Indigenous mentors, the last episode of Medicine of Stories, which is really a healing place to come together and listen to stories with Leona Prince. It's in 2 days' time and hosted by the incredible Monique Graysmith, who, if you haven't been in her presence, is just a healing human from start to finish. So if you want to join us, this is the last chance to come in for that final episode. And of course, each year, started by the incredible Jenna Jasek, our Director of Indigenous Learning. This course started off as an organizational course that Jenna helped us learn as some of us are non-Indigenous, and has grown into this incredible offering that offers 4 different seasons that decolonize learning and take you through an understanding of truth and reconciliation. And each month we join from November to May with a different Indigenous speaker, author, creator. And so we are deeply grateful for all of them coming to share. And we have a super early bird registration open. It doesn't start until November, but we would love if you would sign up and carry on learning with us. So that link should be in the chat. And I have the incredible Rachel Zimmerman with me, who does so much, not always chatting like I am, but doing so much behind the scenes to support us.
Hi, my name's Rachel. I'm the education program coordinator with Take Me Outside. And on behalf of our organization, I'm super excited to be here tonight. I'm joining you gratefully from the heart of Winnipeg on the banks of the Red River in Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Innuit, and the Dakota, and the homeland of the Red River Métis. And I'd also additionally like to recognize that Winnipeg sources its drinking water from Shoal Lake 40 First Nations, which is in Treaty 3 territory. And so before we get started tonight, I just wanted to also share some upcoming opportunities we have with Take Me Outside. So our outdoor learning certification program has just recently launched in French, and you're able to sign up for that. So we've also done a revamp of the original course to make it a little bit more user-friendly, added some new features. So both of these courses are available to sign up. They're asynchronous, 30 hours, and really geared to help you start your outdoor learning journey and integrate that into your teaching practice. I also want to share that Take Me Outside Day registration is live. So you can join us for a full week of activities, speakers, and events in October from October 20th to 24th. And we ask that you join us to celebrate the 14th year of Take Me Outside Day on Wednesday, October 22nd. So Jay just popped that link in the chat. Registration is now open, so you can join us for another amazing day. We'll be releasing the lineup of speakers and events that's going to be happening coming soon.
Amazing. Such an incredible initiative, and so beautifully put together every year, and such an amazing part to be a part of. It's free for you to do, so just we hope that you join us. Okay, it helps us just to have a little understanding of who's joining us in this moment. So I'm going to launch a really quick poll. We're just going to keep it open for just a minute. And there's two questions there. There's what kind of educator are you? And then where you're joining us from. Now we've split the from kind of across what some people call Turtle Island or North America. And then there's one little box for rest of the world. So please feel free to share in the chat. Zoom only lets you have many options. So we can't fit in every country, unfortunately. Um, but we're really grateful for this. So we've got over 300 people here live, an amazing community of people who care about this work, who are taking this work perhaps intergenerationally or into communities, and we are incredibly grateful that you join us in these. So I'm just going to leave it open just for another 5 seconds or so. I'm going to close it in 3, 2, 1. Okay, and let's share the results. So we have someone from pretty much every single demographic of educator that we could think of, and some people who are not strictly educators but just passionate about learning. So we're really glad you're here, and lots of folks from representing from where we are, and a little bit everywhere. So friends from Hawaii. Wow, if you're coming from around the world, please share in the chat. We are so grateful for you. Okay, let's keep going. You know, we have over 100 outdoor learning partners, most of them non-profit, all of them here to support you in your outdoor learning. So whether it's a place specific or water or a particular topic, these people are dedicated to supporting you. So please check out our partners page. There are many free resources, ideas for funding, all of these things. And we hope we've created a space where you can get everything you need in one spot. But here, into the good stuff. We are here for Being Held and Known by the Land with Dr. Lee Joseph, who's written these two incredible books that we share in our nonprofit store. So links will be in the chat. So please feel free to dive in and have a look. But Stayawat, or Dr. Lee Joseph, is an ethnobotanist, researcher, and community activist whose aim is to contribute to cultural knowledge renewal in connection to Indigenous plant foods and medicines. As part of this mission, she founded Squalwyn Botanicals, which is an Indigenous business creating small batch botanical skincare products based in British Columbia. um, honoring traditional Squamish plant knowledge. They incorporate wild harvested plants and organic high quality ingredients. And she shares this kind of Indigenous plant knowledge in written form in both of those books, Held by the Land and The Land Knows Me. And both Rachel and I have been freaking out because we love your books. I shared it in my best friend's book club, and it is just the greatest honor to have you here with us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you to everyone who's joining. I'll share some slides in a moment just so there's some visuals to go along with what I'm going to share, but I'll also just start by introducing myself in my Scotish Nation, my Squamish language. Pasquale, Lee Joseph Queensna, Stiawit Quishaman, Scotish Ochomeo, Anwanakstan Squalowin, Eochtan Sequatal. Hello, my name is Lee Joseph. My ancestral name is Stiawit, and I come from the Squamish First Nation on my father's side. And I'm happy to be here today with everybody who's joining. I'm going to go ahead and see if technology will cooperate. And let's see, that's looking good. Okay, perfect. So I am just going to walk through some slides that share some visuals from my home territory. I'm calling in from Squamish Ochameo today, so my ancestral homelands here in Squamish. And I want to just tell you a little bit more about myself, ground this conversation in some of the learnings that I've gathered so far in my path with working with culturally important plants. So, and then also share a little bit specifically about the book resources that I have published. Yeah. Okay. So who am I? I am a mother to two kids, Ava and Jake, who are 11 and 9 now. And they really are the inspiration for so much of the work that I do. And they're illustrated into my children's book, The Land Knows Me, which was really, really fun. I'll talk about that in a little bit. I hold a bachelor's in botany. I conducted my master's and PhD work with my home community in Squamish, focusing on botany and ethnobotany. I have worked in Indigenous communities in southern BC, northern BC, and the Yukon primarily. And a lot of that work has been looking at the link between culturally grounded approaches to health and wellness and what the role of connection to the land and Indigenous plants is within that area. I'm also founder of Squallow Botanicals, which has been a really lovely parallel, uh, I guess, path to have going with my academic path because it's very creative. I've been able to build a team that includes family members and community members from Squamish, and it's just been a really lovely creative way to further kind of the fact that I love plants and love to integrate them into kind of all aspects of life. I want to take a moment to honor some of my teachers. And these are not all the people who I, have learned from and continue to learn from, but on this slide, in the top left is my great uncle Chester Thomas, and he's from my Snuneymuxw, or Nanaimo side of my family. And growing up, I grew up on Vancouver Island, so away from Squamish territory. And growing up, we would go and visit my great uncle and great auntie Eva a lot. And I write about it in Held by the Land, but really the foundation for where I started to connect, spending time on the land with loved ones, sharing nourishing meals with ingredients that we've harvested from the land really come from those visits. And so I want to honor him as a starting place for this path in my life. On the top right is my Auntie Joy. Sialtanot is her ancestral name, and she's the education director in Squamish, but she has really been my mentor in the community work that I do, especially in terms of how to operate as both a researcher and a community member. And in that photo, she's holding the seeds of cattail, which were utilized and woven in with mountain goat wool for for mountain goat wool blankets in Squamish and other Coast Salish territories. The bottom right is my father, Squattlequompton Siam, and he's a hereditary chief from the Upper Squamish Valley, where I live here. And he, in that photo, is eating a sasky, or the salmonberry shoots that come out in the spring. And both he and my mom have kept myself and my siblings really connected to our Squamish culture. But this was on a forest walk where we were talking about plants, and he happened to just jump back to a childhood memory. Then he hadn't eaten saskies for decades, but he was able to find the perfect one, show me the bendability, demonstrate how to peel it, and then to enjoy that food that brought him right back to his childhood. So he is, being a hereditary chief, he's shared a lot with us about the responsibility of what it means to think about community care and how you share within community. And then the bottom left is my late uncle, Ronald Newman. Lots of people called him Chum as well. And he was a really, really wonderful plant knowledge holder whose main message and teaching to me was how important it is to involve youth at every possible point in terms of creating opportunities to be out on the land and sharing this knowledge that is so critical to, identity, to health and wellness. And so I just want to honor and ground what I'm sharing with you in terms of some of the people who've guided me so far. So ethnobotany is a definition for this, field is the study of the direct interrelationships between people and plants. So it goes more beyond just the uses of plants. That being said, as an academic field, ethnobotany is definitely grounded in very colonial underpinnings. It was established by a man named John Harshberger, really as a way of kind of taking an extractive approach to plant knowledge and looking at the economic benefit and the uses for plants specifically. And so often, as is the case with many of these academic avenues, the initial iteration of this field was marginalizing and sort of erasing the Indigenous stewards and people who carried this knowledge, and really just looking at kind of extracting knowledge. So over the decades, this field has really changed and continues to change. That being said, when I was going through my academic path, there were many points where I recognized a lack in Indigenous representation in the literature that I was turning to, and also just the often needing to go through older ethnographies that were written in very kind of outsider perspectives, often quite racist in how they're written. And so one of the reasons that I set out to write, which I'll sort of get a little bit more into, was to think about what kinds of resources I would have loved to have seen as a student that would have helped me to feel reflected and to kind of keep that space for the relationships that exist when we're talking about relationships with ancestral plants and the land. So I'd like to take a moment to ground this talk in each of your personal experiences and personal, life stories. So I invite you to either close your eyes or just look inwards while I walk through just a short visualization. So I want you to picture a place on the land that's been important to you in your life. Maybe it was a backyard garden or a favorite trail. Picture what it's like to be there. Notice some of the details. Are there any sounds or maybe wind or sun on your face? Now, I invite you to look around and see if there's any plants that accompany you in this place on the land that's been important to you in your life. Are there any scents to the plants, perhaps flavor associated with them? Feel what it's like to be in this place that's important to you in your life, surrounded by plants that are familiar to you. And now I offer that you extend to think about any people that might connect you to this place or that you've spent time with in this place. Perhaps they taught you about the plants or the place that you're in your mind's eye. And just take a moment to breathe in just the feeling of what it's like to be in a place that holds importance in your life for your story and your experience, connected to plants and connected to a person or people that are important in your life. And as you come back to this talk, to this presentation, I invite you to go back to that place, to access that place, because what I'm talking about today, and really what we're discussing, is that intersection between our personal histories, our loved ones, our relatives, and how we build connections through our own lives, through our lived, histories. And today, um, as we kind of come back together, I'm going to be sharing stories of that intersection for myself because as I've gone through this community-based work, this academic work, it's very, very connected. It can't really be separated at all from my personal path of reconnecting to culture and identity and, wanting to share and contribute both through the books that I've published, but also the broader work that I do through academia, but especially community-based work. So thank you for joining me in that short exercise. I just want to ground the books that I'll be sharing a little bit in some of the context for the work that I've done through my community-based research. So one of the gifts of this path has been and continues to be having the chance to sit with elders and learn from elders. And so in the different communities that I've lived in over the last, I guess, decade of my life. So I moved up to northern BC into Tahltan territory for some years, and then further north into Trondheim territory in the Yukon. And I grew up, as a visitor from another territory in Wasanich and Lekwungen territories on southern Vancouver Island. And so often, identity and belonging has been a theme in my life, but it's been such a gift to be able to build relationships and that are based on trust and respect and reciprocity with elders in different regions. And I really honor the teachings and guidance that has been shared with me by some elders who've passed on and by elders who I continue to work with. So one of the foundational premises for the work I do is, the statement that it is our inherent right as Indigenous peoples to access healthy foods, medicines, and to spend time on our ancestral lands, and to define our own health and wellness definitions and practices. And, in terms of my academic work and the underpinning for the books that I'll talk a little bit more about, it really is an act of resistance, resilience, renewal to reclaim cultural knowledge and to do that, through a lens that is grounded in indigeneity. And so often still, there are many systemic barriers connected to, colonial history and current, ongoing reality for many Indigenous people across Turtle Island that just really make it important to have these, kind of representations and access to knowledge in order to do just what I'm doing, which is reclaiming and strengthening my own identity on this path. Another pillar of the work I do is this understanding of plants as relatives. And quite often, when I've been teaching in a university setting or even earlier on in my career leading plant walks or things like that, quite often there can still be this sort of mentality of putting ourselves above other, more than human life. And really, when we think about plants as relatives, it's thinking about what relationship looks like. And if we think about how to be in good relationship with our loved ones or with people that we respect in life, think about some of the ways that we hold responsibility to uphold that relationship. And so some of those, pillars of those relationships would be respect, reciprocity, responsibility, and when we shift to thinking of, plants as kind of economic resources or, kind of thinking of them simply in extractive ways to then thinking of them as relatives and relations, then it's really nice to think about how that changes our perspective on how we might be engaging with those plants and with the ecosystems and lands that they grow in, and then extending that to thinking about indigenous stewardship and relationships that have been in place for thousands of years in terms of keeping those good relationships with plants as relatives. So with that background, I'll jump into what it's meant to me to create Indigenous land-based learning resources. It was at the end of towards the end of my doctoral field work when I started a conversation with the publisher for Held by the Land, which is Quarto Books. And I guess just rewinding a little further than that, while I was doing my doctoral work, part of the main sort of structure of the field work with community members was to go out onto the land to learn to identify where particular plants grow, how to identify the plants, and then also how to harvest from them sustainably, and then we would take plant materials back to Totem Hall, which is our community hall, and then create recipes, either food or like wellness recipes with the plants. And one of the things that while I was uh, doing my field work, it was actually interrupted by COVID. And so we had to shift from going on the land together to meeting virtually, which is a really tough thing to do. But something that came out of that was that people were really wanting a resource to continue their own learning. They were really wanting a resource that had everything from plant identification to storytelling to recipes. And so that's really where Held by the Land came from. And so this book has been just a really wonderful experience for me to write the book, to have the chance to look to my community supports and other botanists in the supports of kind of how to write this book. So the first half of the book is storytelling and from my own perspective and my own experiences through childhood and beyond of learning with plants. It covers topics like building relationships with plants, mindful harvesting considerations, really emphasizing that growing plants and purchasing seeds or starts from native plant nurseries is a really great way to familiarize yourself with plants that doesn't put more pressure on wild plant populations or potentially create more barriers for Indigenous people and communities who are just reconnecting to to plants and having those plants be available in their territories. And then the second half of the book is plant profiles. So I'll go through and kind of talk a little bit more about those. The Held by the Land deck was published a year after the book, and this idea really came from a coastal plants card deck that I had the chance to utilize, and it was created by the Vancouver Island Coastal Indigenous Foods Network, I believe is the full name. And it's a really wonderful resource. It does have photographs and is more of kind of like a plant ID guide, but also has cultural knowledge. And so this book and the card deck are both illustration based. So there's Indigenous illustrators, Sarah Jim, who did all of the color illustrations, and Ocean Highland, who did all of the line drawings, botanical line drawings. But the plant cards have the Squamish name and then the English and Latin name, the line drawing, some information about the plant gifts. So really some of the beautiful ways that these plants uphold relationships, whether it be as a food or medicine or material. And then on the back, there's information about habitat and ecology and sustainable harvesting considerations. So it's been so wonderful to hear from different people who reach out and tell me how they're utilizing the book and card deck. And, one thing is through Squalwyn and through, my other like academic work, I am just often getting people reaching out with an interest in terms of having a talk or a workshop or a walk, and because I'm not able to do those things, these resources have been. It's been really neat to see how they've been picked up. So I've heard of this book supporting curriculum all the way from kindergarten through to university level courses. I just spoke with someone who assigned Held by the Land as a text for their university course. The lesson plans have been built out around both the book and the cards. And so everything from kind of doing plant ID or scavenger hunts, using them as flashcards to learn Squamish plant names, aiding in plant identification and ways of supporting like community gardens or native plant gardens at schools. And then also just the information on processing plants as well. And throughout both these resources, there's an overall focus on building respectful, responsible, and reciprocal relationships with plants. And so, again, through the book and the card deck has a shorter booklet that has a lot of this information, but it is pared down from the book. But throughout the book, there are very practical kind of checklists and questions and things to consider in terms of what it means to build respectful, responsible, and reciprocal relationships with plants, and how to extend that into, learning opportunities. The next slides, I'll go through some of the themes in the book and how connecting to plants and the land supports Indigenous people, but also just anybody, any human in general who is, has a love for connection to plants and the land or an interest in learning more. Uh, and I should just say too that I wrote Held by the Land very much from my personal experience and grounded in Squamish culture. And the reason for that is it didn't feel like I was the person to try and kind of achieve explaining and capturing the breadth of cultural connection, specific information and relationships of the plants in this book across the growing ranges because they span many, many different Indigenous territories. So it would really made sense for me to ground that in my own personal storytelling, but write it in a way that ideally is accessible to many different people who are interested in plants. And of course, my community was at the foundation of that, and other Indigenous communities who are doing this work of reconnecting. But again, more broadly to people who are looking to deepen their own relationships and understanding with plants and the ecosystems they grow in and connections to the land. So as I mentioned throughout the book, there are teachings and kind of practical resources around what sustainable harvesting means. And it will differ depending on what part of the plant you're harvesting. If it's the bulb or root, then you're, essentially removing that whole plant from its environment, but some bulbs and roots can be separated out and some sections planted back. If you're taking flowers, there's different considerations for leaving enough for pollinators so that the fruit can develop on a plant. or if you're taking leaf buds, for example, you're sort of pruning the plants. So really thinking about how to spread out a harvest, even going before that in terms of, do you have a space, a garden box or garden or community garden where you can grow these plants yourself? So many of these plants are wonderful pollinator plants. And so really thinking about the more than human relationships as well with flowers and fruit in particular, because lots of birds and small mammals rely on these plants as well. So lots of information in the book and card deck on this topic. Some of the ways that, like I've mentioned this already, but the reconnection to our own, stories, like if we go back to the exercise that we did, how do these places on the land that are important to us support our identity? And for me, when I think about doing this work with plants, the more that I learn, the more that I understand, that I'm in relationship, and with that relationship comes responsibility. It also helps me to strengthen my own cultural identity and understand how to enact that reciprocity in the ways that I move through the world. So much strength can come from grounding in our own mindful, relationships and practices that connect us to the land and to plants. And this is really something when it comes to my kids that I've really wanted them from, the very outset to really feel that they belong, they have a right to be on the land. This is a place that they can, gather their strength from and know that they belong. Being out on the land helps support cultural and spiritual health and wellness. And I'd mentioned before, just in terms of academic work, really looking at what it means to define our own culturally grounded health and wellness practices, and plants and plant foods and medicines, which are often one and the same, really are a strong aspect, of culturally grounded health and wellness in my community, in other communities that I've worked with, and in so many other Indigenous communities who are already doing this work of reconnecting. But it's very interwoven with cultural and spiritual practices as well. And then connection to place through rebuilding plant relationships. Quite often, when they're, for Indigenous people who are maybe living away from their home territory, either by choice or through some kind of forced relocation, or even, for Indigenous people living on their home territories, there still are barriers to accessing the land at times, whether it be land privatization, development, or even just you know through kind of surveillance and people, saying, like, I've had people approach me when I'm harvesting or practicing land-based cultural practices to say, that I don't belong there, I'm not allowed to be there. So those are very much barriers that exist. And so again, this act of connecting to place through rebuilding plant relationships and thinking about the ways, in our own lives and our own work that we, each do, that we can help support people to be carrying out these practices. And often when we have our own relationships and understanding, we can extend that and understand, what it means to others to be rebuilding those relationships. And then just that, a theme throughout the book is that spending time on the land together with loved ones, with family members, or solo, just brings such joy and connection. And that is something that often, within more kind of broader media, a lot of the Indigenous stories that are shared there can still be through a lens of trauma. And it's so important to acknowledge and to understand and to educate ourselves, about the impacts of colonization, of residential schools, and to really think about how to shift and change, our own understanding and to grow around those topics. It's also really been theme for me in my work that there's so much joy and connection that comes, especially spending time out on the land and in places where, especially with elders, like memories just flood back when either you're in the place on the land, or like with my dad, tasting a flavor that brings you right back to childhood. And so that's been a really lovely part of all of this work. And so in Held by the Land, coming from a Western science background as well, I really wanted to have a resource that bridged, both Indigenous science and Western science. And so having a resource like this, like an indigenized uh, life cycle diagram, and just sort of showing the that kind of interaction in terms of like the harvesting of fruits and the role of flowers within that. And I do have a version of this that I use in my teaching that has the Squamish language at each step as well. And so having these kinds of resources can really help to just invite in those elements of relational kind of ways of being with plants. And I just thought I'd show you one of the spreads from the second half of the book. So there are 44 plant profiles, and each of the plant profiles has the Squamish name with the phonetic pronunciation. And I worked with a language expert from Squamish on all of the pronunciations in the book. And language, of course, is another area of knowledge that's been highly impacted, but there's a lot of work with language revitalization happening. And so there's a Squamish name, the English common name, and then the Latin name. And it was important. It was actually, I'm working on a book with Jim Projar and Andy McKinnon, who wrote Plants of the Pacific Northwest, which is one of, if anybody has used a plant guide on the coast, I'm sure you would have had a copy of this book. So we're working on an updated coastal plant guide. But I say that because they both, especially Jim, really helped with this section of the book in terms of finding that balance between having really accurate ecological information, habitat information, the botanical description, and balancing it with the cultural teachings and other elements in terms of the plant gifts and the sustainable harvest and timing. And then, of course, each page also comes with a recipe to try with each of the plant ingredients. So that is Held by the Land. I'm just keeping an eye on the time here. I'll try and cruise through these next slides. So more recently, I was invited to create a book for young learners connected to plants. And it sort of came into my realm of awareness when Braiding Sweetgrass was adapted to a youth reader. And I thought, oh, I wonder if we can do that to Help Out the Land. And then that conversation with the publisher led to The Land Knows Me, a which is the book that I'll talk about next. So this is a children's book. Again, kind of going back to that importance of including youth in land-based learning and creating those memories and those opportunities, to be grounded in the land and feel that confidence that comes from knowing who is surrounding you in terms of your plant relatives. I've seen that with both my kids, that they absolutely love walking into the forest and recognizing plants and being able to, understand how to be in relationship with those plants. Uh, Another big motivation was increasing representation. And, like I mentioned, being in university and not feeling like I had a lot of literature I could turn to that I felt myself represented in. Similarly, as a child, like I can't even imagine what it would have meant to me as being, one of two Indigenous kids in my elementary school, having, experiences with racism at, kind of as early as grade 3, like just having books that would again reflect my way of seeing the world, and my experience would have been so wonderful. So that's also where this book came from. And then this theme of learning together on the land. And again, my kids have been so central to this in that it's been such a joy to, from when the time that they were babies, to take them outside as I've been learning, as I've been visiting the same trails and estuaries and, mountainsides over the seasons throughout the years and building my own relationships. They've also been doing that alongside me. And so it's been so exciting to, I'll just share some of the spreads from The Land Knows Me, but to have this book come out this year. It was published in March of this year, and the premise for the first half of the book is I am taking the kids on a plant walk, or we're going on a plant walk together. And so my daughter Ava and my son Jake and my little niece Aletla, which her name translates to wild raspberry in Squamish, we're all going on a plant walk through different kind of ecosystems. And each page has some language aspect to it. It has some teachings. So on this page, Ava is saying her introduction to her plant relatives, and just has some teachings along with why we introduce ourselves and where that practice comes from. On this page, Aletla is pointing up to Swat, or the Swainson's thrush, which is a bird that comes through Squamish territory right at the time that salmon berries are ripening. And so there's a cultural relationship between this bird and salmon berries, and the belief is that the song of the Huat ripens the salmon berries, or the Yatonai berries. And so again, just some of these ecological, noticing the timing of certain things in our natural environment and how they indicate other things in terms of, ripening fruit, that kind of thing. And then having the language involved in each page. And there's the pronunciation on each page for that language, which is a really nice way to refer back to just how to even shape our mouths around these words and sounds. And I really love to think about people well outside of Squamish territory, taking the time to sound out these words that for so long have been really not, like, for my grandmother was not allowed to speak her language, and my father didn't grow up speaking Squamish because of that, because of residential school impacts on my grandmother. So thinking of language coming back is a really beautiful part of this book. So again, just kind of illustrating some of the connections between pollinators and plants, and it's just some fun facts. Kids are so curious, and so there's a lot embedded in these pages, whereas you can just kind of read the story, or you can flip through, and in each of these boxes, there's little side teachings and stories about whether it be pollinators or nurse logs, or those kinds of things. So lots of different layers in the book. And then after the story part of the book, there are also plant profiles at the end with these beautiful illustrations done by an artist based here in Squamish, Natalie Schnitter. And they're color illustrations of the plants that are, again, have the Squamish name, the English common name, and the Latin name. And then, similar to Held by the Land, there's a breakdown of further information if, kids are wanting to do a bit more of a deep dive into a particular plant, or go into their backyard or trail and kind of learn a little bit more. And then there's also recipes included, kid-friendly recipes included in this book as well. So, just in closing, some themes for the work that I do with plants really are focusing on giving back to my family, to the land, and to community, and really honoring the teachings and the work that my ancestors have done to carry forward pieces of this knowledge through unimaginable challenges and, grief and experiences. But with incredible generosity, kindness, and love. That's really what I remember from my, my grandparents, my great aunts and uncles. And so I'm so grateful to them and honor them in the work that I do. So in Sculptmish, we raise our hands in thanks. So I'd like to say, hi, Chika, thank you so much for your attention. And I think we have a little bit of time for some questions.
Heichka, thank you. The incredible. Thank you for that visualization. What a beautiful way to connect. And I got to visit with my grandmother who's passed. So that was a very special thing to go into those places. Um, and very moving. And then just to see the way that you've brought together your scientific knowledge and your Indigenous knowledge and how you increase people's capacity to connect. As someone who did a science degree, so many of those papers are so esoteric and difficult to connect to. And so when you create something that is so accurate but so warm and welcoming and reduces that barrier for people, I just think that is a gift. That's a huge gift.
Thank you.
So lots of folks are coming in from north, east, and they're asking, is the Held by the Land guide, for example, in the cards, are they specific to the West Coast? Um, you mentioned it a little bit, but just thought I'd give you a chance.
Yeah, that's a great question. So both books, Held by the Land and The Land Knows Me, the plants that are included in the book, most of them have a very big range across, North America in some cases, and some even like completely like global distribution. So there is relevance in terms of the plant species. Some, are more regional, but usually, even if it's not the exact same species of wild rose, for example, there will be closely related species, or plants like yarrow and stinging nettle have really wide distribution. So there should be kind of something for everybody in there, and not super like place specific in terms of Squamish and this region here.
Thank you so much. Very helpful. Um, Emily asked, I'm curious if you're planning on creating any kid-friendly cards to accompany The Land Knows Me.
That's a great question. I definitely have it in my mind to reach out and to inquire if there would be a pathway towards that, because I've just found the cards in particular are so great to, bring out on the trail, and kids especially. My kids had various kind of illustrated card decks when they were a bit younger, and they just loved them. So I think that's a great idea.
A small plug, the Outdoor Learning Store does have a small, very small publishing arm now. So just throwing that
Ah,
out there. I'm just a
wonderful.
couple a couple of different people have kind of been asking the same kind of question in a sort of roundabout way. And it's one that I hold as well, as non-Indigenous people who are educators of, I'm trying to learn about my ancestors and Celtic roots and the plant medicines of the place. But when I live here and I'm surrounded and I want to build relationship and reciprocity with my relatives that are here, do you have some advice for how we can do that in a good way, of balancing those things? I know it's a big question.
hmm No, it's a great question. And I think that, one of the reasons I created these resources is I think having as many resources from Indigenous authors when we're talking specifically about Indigenous knowledge and relationships is so critical. I think that, having approaching teaching or sharing, I find it really powerful to just to ground it in personal kind of positionality. Like I am, from this place, I'm learning about my own, cultural heritage. And at the same time, we're taking the time to build out the storylines of what shared histories exist in the places that we now live, if it's not our, where our ancestors are from. And that it's such an act of respect and and reciprocity in a sense to educate ourselves further so that we can understand, more about, in this case, Indigenous knowledge, the impacts on Indigenous knowledge and cultural practices, and then, highlight Indigenous voices to help support that understanding and perspective. Um, yeah, and then there's, I mean, so many wonderful resources too to further, your own learning and education and sort of critical self-awareness. And I would say, one of the biggest things you can do if you're working within an Indigenous community context is to further educate yourself and process a lot of the, feelings and grief and learning that may come up in learning more about the, colonial context for Indigenous communities across this area now known as North America, because it will only help you show up in a more, supportive, informed, and helpful way as well.
Thank you. That's a really helpful reflection. There's lots of people coming in who are very excited um, to share things and ask questions. Um, Somebody said, I'm an art teacher and would love to use your books and cards with lessons for creative inspiration. Do you ever zoom into classrooms, or you mentioned there were lessons around the book? Is that something they can access that way?
Yeah, so right now it's more been people telling me about the lesson plans they've created
Okay.
based around these. One in fact was just at my yoga class the other day. A teacher said that they're doing sort of a project that starts with botanical sketches based from the cards, and then they're taking them into the field. Something that I'm working towards with Swallowin is incorporating a not-for-profit arm to be able to really further develop the community give back piece, one of which is, kind of the educational resources. So that is something that I'm working towards, but don't have kind of ready to go yet.
Okay, we'll watch this space. And I love that, you know, and somebody's asking, we're running out of time, but about being able to understand conservation and reciprocity, and that the more people know, if more people are out harvesting or whatever. But I feel like in your book, it does such a fantastic job of explaining in both books for different age audiences, of explaining that responsible harvest, that if people are using that resource to guide them, then there's going to be that caring, loving approach to going out into the environment and doing it in relationship as opposed to in an act of taking.
Mhm.
So that's a hopeful thing for me, is that resources like this exist in order to help people have a better understanding.
Yes, yeah, and I would say authors like Leanne Simpson and Robin Wall Kimmerer also bring, help to kind of bring elements to what it means to reclaim relationships with land and the plants, and yeah, just from their own perspectives, and that can really help in our broader understanding as well.
Thank you so much, Dale Lee. It's been an honor to meet you. I sweat through my shirt when we first come on the line. I have to admit, I'm so nervous because you're such a hero of mine, and
Oh,
Rachel too. So it's been
thank
such an
you.
honor to have you here with us. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much. It's been so wonderful, and thank you everyone for joining. I really appreciate it.
We understand if you have to go forth into the world, but those of you who are staying here, just stay around for 3 more minutes, and we do have a couple of prize givings to give.
Okay.
And the recording, goodbye. Aichka.
Bye. Bye, Chica.
The recording will be in your follow-up email that comes tomorrow. If you don't have it by lunchtime, 12 p.m. Pacific, let's say, please check in your spam, and there's a link to a certificate there. Sorry if we didn't get to your question, but here we go. So we have 4 prizes to give away. Two $25 gift cards to the Outdoor Learning Store that you could use perhaps to engage in one of these resources. So our first winner is Maureen, Maureen, Maureen Elaine Bouillon. Bouillon. Hope I've said that right. Maureen Elaine Bouillon. You're our first winner. Congratulations. Next winner is, scrolling with my eyes closed, Alicia Conley. Aleshia Conley. Alicia. You're our second winner. Congratulations. Our third winner with a $25 gift card to the Take Me Outside store is Katie, Katy Solo. Katie Solo, you'll be getting an email tomorrow or the next day. And our last winner is Monique, Monique Sevald, Sevald. Monique Sevald, you're our fourth and final winner of the evening. Thank you all so, so much for being here. I thought Lee was incredible. I know, I can't breathe. But thank you all for being here with us, and we look forward to seeing you. Our last one is next week. We have an amazing group of different Indigenous presenters as well. So all different ways and beings of talking about Indigenous resources. So we hope we'll see you next week. Have a wonderful evening. Take care.